Questions 32 to 42, let's read the blurb. This passage and accompanying graph are adapted from what history says about inequality and technology. So that's going to be the topic, 2017 by The Economist Newspaper Limited. First paragraph really introduces the topic of the passage. It says, as the economy becomes more automated, doomsayers worry that the gap between the haves and the have-nots, obviously the rich and the poor, will only grow. History shows, however, that this need not be so. So this is going to be the main claim of the passage, that I guess the gap between the rich and the poor doesn't always grow. And then it acknowledges, line 5, that the recent rise in earnings for skilled workers is a rare historical phenomenon. And so this guy, Gregory Clark from UC Davis, looked into this, and he says that, line 12, in the past, the skilled wage premium, defined as the difference in wages between craftsmen, such as carpenters and masons, and unskilled laborers, has been fairly stable, save, which means except for two sharp declines. So I'm just going to make a note that this is the skilled wage premium. From the first paragraph, we can say that this is kind of the main claim or the main idea. And just keep in mind, what the skilled wage premium is. It's the difference between the craftsmen and the unskilled laborers, their wage. And now he says that there are two sharp declines. So the next paragraph is a little bit hard. I want to go through it. So this is going to be the first decline in the skilled wage premium. And it says the first drop came in the 14th century. Now, when you're reading this, you have to realize that from line 18, all the way until line 24, this is sort of giving the background. I didn't realize this at first when I was reading it, and it kind of confused me. So what do they basically say? The background was life expectancy was short, taking on apprenticeship was a heavy opportunity cost. So that means not a lot of skilled laborers, apparently. So we can just say this as background, not a lot of skilled laborers. But the main point of the paragraph is talking about the drop. So the drop is really talking about right over here. When the Black Death struck England in 1348, interest rates fell further to 5%. Apprenticeships became much more attractive for whatever reason, and the increased supply of skilled labor drove down the wage premium. So it probably pays to map this out. So when interest rates go down, this is what you guys will be doing if you ever take an econ class, the labor supply went up. That means more people working. And as a result, the skilled wage premium went down. And the reason that happened, which they don't explain, is because, the more workers there are, the more skilled workers, the higher the supply. That means the less their wage is going to be. This is similar to kind of what's happening in the US right now in terms of lawyers. What's going on is that there are way too many lawyers, probably in the US right now, a lot of law schools. And as a result, what's happening is a lot of people who come out of law school are forced to take lower paying jobs than they had in the past. Now, I'm not an expert on this, so I'm sure there's more details to that I don't know. But this is actually a real phenomenon, so you can just keep that in mind. All right, next paragraph talks about the second decline. Remember, the main claim from above was that there are two major drops in history. And what does it say? The second big decline in the skilled wage premium came after the Industrial Revolution. And that kind of makes sense, because what does it say? Craftsmen whose skills took years to hone suddenly found themselves being replaced by machines operated by workers with just a few months training. So obviously their wage is not going to be as high as the skilled craftsmen. Then it mentions the Luddites who were smashing machines. And the rest of the paragraph just gives some more details about that. In the next column, we talk about a different inequality measure. So if the skilled wage premium was the first inequality measure, then this one, Peter Lindert, also at UC Davis, used the Gini coefficient. And they give some details here, but I think the main point is in line 52. The two measures, which I'm guessing are the skilled wage premium and the Gini coefficient, went on to fall, not bottoming out until the mid-20th century. At this point in line 55, the discussion moves to today. So the first one was more like historical or the first part. So what does it say? What distinguishes, line 55, the advances of the computer age from those of the Industrial Revolution, because that's the age that we're in now, is that they have favored skilled workers. That's the computer age. It also says university degrees have been a reliable proxy for skill, but this may change as artificial intelligence comes by. And then they also say 4 of the fastest growing occupations involve personal care, and it doesn't require a bachelor's degree. So really the first part of this paragraph you have to recognize is saying, hey, there's something different about the computer age, so it might not follow exactly. Yet on the other hand, there are other factors working, such as, involvement in personal care, which may make history sort of follow the Industrial Revolution. Because if there are a lot of occupations that don't require a bachelor's degree, that would suggest that the skilled wage premium is going to be small, because then the difference between skilled workers and unskilled workers is going to remain not very large. And the last paragraph is basically kind of a summary. He says, to assume that current economic trends will persist is to assume an inefficient labor market. Ken Rogoff at Harvard argues that as wage premiums for a particular group of workers rises, the firms will have greater incentive to replace them. So this trend that he's probably talking about in the computer age where skilled workers are being favored, he's saying that's an inefficient labor market. And if the wages of these skilled people become too high, the firms are going to find some ways to replace them, because otherwise it's going to be too much money for them. So overall in the passage, we are talking about this idea of the gap between the skilled and unskilled workers. Historically, they basically say that, this gap is really not consistent, and they give 2 examples. And then they talk about today, which might be different, but the last 2 paragraphs also cast doubt on that. 32, over the course of the passage, the main focus shifts from, so let's read it, a criticism of current methods of measuring income inequality to a suggestion for a better approach. So the current methods are obviously the skilled wage premium and then the Gini coefficient. There was really no criticism of them, because nowhere in the passage did it say that these are good, these are bad, and there wasn't any suggestion for a better approach. So A is going to be off. B, a discussion of historical trends in income to an analysis of more recent ones. So yeah, this does make sense, because remember the first column on the left talked about 2 drops in the skilled wage premium, whereas when they started talking about technology in the last 2 paragraphs, that's current day. So B looks good so far. Choice C, an overview of patterns in income inequality to an inquiry into the causes. So C, I feel like you can kind of make it work if you count the discussion about the 2 drops in the skilled wage premium as the overview of patterns. Now that may or may not count as an overview. I think it's a little bit narrow to count as an overview, but if you did count it as an overview, I would say that the causes were integrated into those paragraphs. So it's not like first we talk about patterns and then we talk about causes. It's more like, hey, we're looking at these 2 things, and they talk about the causes when they mention those 2 things. D, an analysis of the skilled wage premium to a critique of other related measures. So D is kind of like A. To say that there's a critique would mean that you're bringing some kind of a value judgment against, in this case, I guess it would be the Gini coefficient. But we're not really, we didn't really get that. No one really said whether it's good or bad. So D, not going to work, and B is the answer. Question 33, in the context of the passage as a whole, the phrase doomsayers worry serves mainly 2. So let's look back at that paragraph. And this is the very first sentence. As more of the economy becomes automated, doomsayers worry that the gap between the haves and have-nots will only grow. History shows, however, that this need not be so. So why is he using the word doomsayers? He's talking about the other side, and obviously his main point is that this is generally not going to happen. So let's look at the answers. Emphasize that a particular view is overly negative. So I think that works because, doomsayers are these people who always predict, disaster or terrible things going to happen, and he disagrees with them. Choice B, associate the author with a specific school of economic thought. So obviously doomsayers is not like a school of economic thought. It's also not the group that the author is in. So B is kind of wrong on both those counts. And C, convey the full urgency of a contemporary problem. So some people might say that let's use this phrase to convey the urgency of a problem, but that's not what the author is doing. The author is using it just to characterize the people who he disagrees with. So this is not the purpose. Whether or not you can use that for that purpose in other cases is another issue. D, suggest the biases of a group of researchers. So biases, maybe, are they researchers? I don't know, that's questionable. So D is kind of off in that regard. And all that means is A is going to be your best choice. 34, which choice provides the best evidence for the idea that Clark's findings in the second paragraph were part of a more widespread phenomenon? His claim is what we've read before. The skilled wage premium has been fairly stable except for 2 sharp declines. So that's the claim. In general, it's stable except for these 2 instances. And the question is asking which choice provides the best evidence that whatever they're talking about is part of a more widespread phenomenon. So whether or not it's the 2 declines or the general stability, I'm not 100% sure. We'll have to go through each choice and see. First one, 17 to 18. This is choice A. The first drop came in the 14th century and had nothing to do with technological change. So this doesn't say anything that his findings are part of a larger phenomenon. So A, probably not going to work. B, 29 to 32. 29, data from Jan Luton and Van Dan, oh, that's one person, of Utrecht University show similar patterns in Belgium, France, and the Netherlands. So again, this is talking about what was going on in, with the Black Death and everything. So this one does seem to work because if they're saying that data from these people show similar patterns in Belgium, France, and the Netherlands, that does sound like a wider phenomenon. And so B will keep for now, looks okay. Choice C, 46 to 47. Using different inequality measures leads to slightly different results. So this is just a contrast to the skilled wage premium. Nothing that says that it's part of a more widespread phenomenon. Choice D, 55 to 57. What distinguishes the advances of the computer age from those of the Industrial Revolution is that they have favored skilled workers. So this is just a contrast between the computer age versus the Industrial Revolution. Again, not saying that their findings were part of a more widespread phenomenon. So B is going to be the best choice, and that's 34. 35, based on the passage, it can be reasonably concluded that there's a strong relationship between fluctuations in the skilled wage premium and fluctuations in the what. So again, skilled wage premium was in the second paragraph. Let's look through first before we look closely at it. A, the average number of years unskilled laborers who take on apprenticeships spend in completing them. I would say A would be good if it said skilled laborers, but the fact that it says unskilled laborers makes it wrong because the unskilled laborers are not the ones taking on the apprenticeships. It certainly was true. They said in the paragraph that the longer it took the skilled laborers to take these apprenticeships, the fewer of them that were doing it. So A is going to be off. B, overall supply of industrial machines available for training apprentices. I don't really think they mention machines as a strong factor. I mean, it's possible, but I'm going to say not likely for choice B. C, total number of workers in the labor force of a particular country in a particular time period. I don't know. I mean, this could be a factor. I don't think the passage really talks about this. C would really be saying that, if you're looking at the total number of workers, obviously there's a division between skilled and unskilled. Let's assume that the shaded part is skilled. Would the total number, let's say there's an increase, so then there's a bigger total number of skilled and unskilled. Would the total numbers or fluctuations in the total number affect or have a stronger relationship between the skilled wage premium? I don't know, because my logic would say even if one country has a bigger population than a smaller country, the proportion of skilled to unskilled seems to me would still to be the same. Regardless, I don't think the passage really talks about this at all. Different size countries, so C, not likely going to work. D, balance of skilled laborers to unskilled ones as a percentage of a particular country's. Yeah, so obviously the balance of skilled to unskilled is going to work. Probably the most direct evidence is in line 27. The increased supply of skilled labor relative to unskilled workers drove down the wage premium. So right here, this relationship is stated. You probably could have guessed that or known that just because the definition of the skilled wage premium is the difference in wages between those two groups. But here it's actually linking it to the supply of skilled labor. Question 36 says using line 51, captured most nearly means. Let's take a look. Start here. The share of earnings captured by the top 1% reached a high in 1870. So what are we talking about? The share of earnings, that's talking about the pay. I would say we can use the same word, the share of earnings earned by the top 1%, or the share of earnings made by the top 1%, or even taken. It's the idea that, simple idea that this group of people is making earnings. So confined means to be limited to a certain space or area. It doesn't make sense. The share of earnings found by them, it's a little bit off. You don't really say that you find earnings or wages. C, the share apprehended. Apprehended can mean to catch, but you usually use apprehend like you're apprehending a criminal. So it kind of gets the idea of getting or taking, but it's usually not used that way. The share of earnings acquired. Yeah, acquire means to basically add on, and it's kind of a more neutral word than apprehend. So it is closest to our guess words, which was, earned or made. Pretend that you can read that. So that's choice D. Question 37, the passage most strongly suggests that major advances in technology are likely to result in. So what are the advances in technology? One was the Industrial Revolution, and two was when they were talking about technology today. So those are the two things I'm kind of keeping in mind, although I probably don't remember the details. So let's look at it real quickly. 37 and 38 should be done together. They're one of those double questions. So advances in technology result in an initial decrease in interest rates and wage premiums. So I don't really remember that relationship that we mapped out. So A, we're just going to have to say, who knows? We'll have to look at the evidence. A rise in wages for craftsmen and other skilled workers. That one seems to be the opposite because, with the Industrial Revolution, they said that, the skilled wage people went down. On the other hand, they did make the point that technology did seem to favor, or today, skilled workers, but I think B is going to be off, so we'll keep it in mind and see what the evidence is. C, overall increase in jobs for both skilled and unskilled workers. That doesn't sound right either. It seems that it's an overall increase in jobs for unskilled. I think that was the point of the Industrial Revolution. D, a loss of jobs for certain types of skilled workers. I think that is true, so I'm thinking we're going to have to look at the evidence and see which one matches up. And the question that we're keeping in mind when we're looking at the evidence is, what is the result of better technology? You want to simplify the question in your head. So the evidence, 11 to 16. Mr. Clark notes that in the past, skilled wage premium, defined as the difference in wages between craftsmen such as carpenters and masons and unskilled laborers, has been fairly stable, save for 2 sharp declines. Does that talk about the result of technology? I don't think so. So I'm going to eliminate choice A. B, 43 to 45. The ratio of craftsman wages to laborers' wage started to fall in the early 1800s and did not recover until 1960. You might be able to argue that that's somehow connected to technology and the Industrial Revolution. One word of caution, though, because it's not specifically mentioned in the lines that they picked out, typically on the SAT, this would not count as enough evidence because you have to have a sentence where the relationship between the technology and the result is absolutely clear. So not likely going to be B unless the other two are worse. That should be an X. C, 57 to 60. So far, university degrees have been a reliable proxy for skill, but this may change as artificial intelligence starts taking jobs away from the white-collar workers. So yeah, this does seem to say that artificial intelligence, if they're calling that technology, will actually take away jobs from white collar workers. So that is a result of technology. Now, which one does that match up with? That one does seem to go along with choice D the best. So for now, we're going to say D goes with C for 38. And then choice D, 65 to 67. In any case, to assume that current economic trends will persist is to assume an inefficient labor market. So again, nothing really here about technology and its result. So all that means is that for 38, it's going to be C. And that goes along best with 37, which is D. 39, it can be reasonably inferred from the discussion of projections from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics that over time, university degrees may become. So keep in mind what it says starting in line 57. So far, university degrees have been a reliable proxy for skill, but this may change as artificial intelligence starts taking jobs. That's what we just wrote. And then this is a sentence they want us to keep in mind. Projections from America's Bureau of Labor Statistics show that 4 of the 5 fastest growing occupations involve personal care. None of those jobs requires a bachelor's degree. So this goes along with the idea that maybe a university degree is not really going to be a reliable indicator of skill. Because of maybe things like artificial intelligence, and also I'd say that's one reason. And the second reason is because personal care generally doesn't involve a college degree. So let's see what the answers are. So what is university degrees going to become? Probably more useless, as people like to say these days. A, weaker indicators of employability. So yeah, definitely because of technology and because they said personal care doesn't take a university degree. A makes sense. Easier to attain than they were prior to the computer age? Maybe, because if they are like not as good for getting a job, maybe they'll be easier. But again, it's that's like the next step. Like what's going to happen after they don't predict good jobs? Is it going to become easier? And the passage doesn't really talk about that. So B it's going a little too far. It's kind of a stretch. C, stronger predictors, definitely not, because from what we just said, it's definitely weaker, unless you're trying to say that university degrees means you're not going to have good earning potential, but I don't think they're going that far. D, less valuable for those who are not studying technology. That might be true if you really think about this, right? Because it says if you're not studying technology, maybe the type of job that you're doing and that whatever you're trained for from college is not really going to be helpful. Again, like B, I think it's just going a little too far. The most direct answer, which definitely is backed up by the passage, is going to be choice A. So just remember on the SAT, you need to pick choices that you can make a good argument that the answer is there in the text, because even though B and D, you might be able to argue, you're not going to be able to justify B or D based on the text. And if they had chosen B or D as the right answer, it would just be not fair. So keep that in mind. Question 40, which of the years listed in the graph was the craftsman wage greatest relative to the laborer wage? So this is the first time I'm looking at the graph. Let's take a look. Craftsman's wage relative to labor wage. And on the X, we've got the year. On the Y, we've got the craftsman wage as a percent, and the laborer wage is 100. So, okay, that makes sense. So like over here in the time of like 1300, it looks like the craftsmen were making 200% compared to 100%. Down here in like 15 to 1600, it looks like they were making 150 to 100, so about 1.5 times. And then more recently, it seems like it's kind of evened out. So the question is asking, when was the craftsman wage greatest relative to the labor wage? That's simply where is the highest point on the graph, and that's over here around the Black Death, or 1300. And so the answer is going to be choice A. 41, according to the graph, the interval in which the craftsman wage remained within the narrowest range of values relative to the labor wage was. Okay, so if this phrasing confused you, what they're really saying is that if the craftsman wage remains within the narrowest of values, they're talking about this up and down fluctuation. So going like this would be remaining within the narrowest value. So just eyeballing it, you can see where did the craftsman wage not vary as much between here to here and probably between here to here. So either 14 to 16 or 14 to 17, or I'd say 18 to 19. And so looking at the answer choices, probably the best one's going to be, I said 14 to 17, they said 15 to 16. 18 to 19 I think is not a bad answer. Let's double check it. I guess to be more precise, 19 includes here, so it probably would include this giant drop. So maybe 1750 to 1850 would be more stable if we were to be precise. So I think that's why choice C is probably better than choice D, but D would have been the closest also. And question 42, based on Clark's findings as described in the third paragraph, what is the most likely explanation for the data for 1200 to 1300? Let's look at that first. Between 12 and 1300, what do we see? We see this gigantic climb in the craftsman wage relative to the laborer's wage. It goes from like 150 to 200 in that, I guess, 100-year period. So looking at that paragraph, remember what I said before. The paragraph is talking about the drop that came in the 14th century. So that was right about here. But before they talk about the drop due to the Black Death, they do give the background, and it says, life expectancy in medieval England was short, interest rates were high, meaning that taking on the 7-year apprenticeship needed to become a craftsman came with a heavy opportunity cost. But interest rates started falling from this period. So again, from our logic before, if interest rates were high, there probably were not a lot of people doing the apprenticeship, which meant the labor supply is small, which meant they were making a lot of money. So the answer is going to have something to do with that. Choice A, life expectancy rose, so more workers became apprentices, which increased the supply of skilled workers. This is wrong on two accounts. Number one, they don't talk about life expectancy. And if the supply of skilled workers went up, then the result is that their pay is going to go down. So that's not going to account for why the graph goes up. So A is out. Interest rates rose, so few workers became apprenticeship, which decreased the supply. So yeah, that's exactly what we read. With a lower supply of skilled workers, then there will be few people with those skills, and so their wage is going to go up. Choice C, cities were growing at a rapid rate, which resulted in projects that increased the demand. So here, one thing is cities are not mentioned, and they also mention unskilled workers. We're not even talking about unskilled workers. If anything, if the demand for unskilled workers went up, then, looking at this graph again, then the relative percent that the craftsmen were making compared to them would it be smaller. So we would expect that number to go down. So that doesn't make sense either. Choice D, new inventions were automating complex tasks, which decreased the demand for skilled workers. So yeah, this is probably factually true at a certain point. But again, from what we saw in the graph, the number was going up. So this new inventions automating complex tasks would be happening when the graph is going to be going down. So B is going to be the best answer.